I sat in the grey chair across from Helen, HR director, and watched her fingers drum on the desk. She hadn't smiled when I walked in. She hadn't offered coffee or asked how my morning was going. The room smelled like stale air freshener and something sour I couldn't name. Behind her, Marcus from finance sat with his arms crossed, staring at his laptop like I wasn't even there. My stomach tightened before anyone spoke. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Making some adjustments, Helen said flatly. No greeting, no context, no warmth in her voice at all. She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. I scanned it once, then again, because the number didn't make sense. My salary had been cut by 47%, effective immediately. The words blurred as I tried to process what I was reading. Budget constraints, she added, like that explained anything. Like that made it reasonable to slash someone's income in half without warning. I opened my mouth but nothing came out. My throat closed. I felt my face burn hot with humiliation and shock. Marcus still didn't look up from his screen. Helen tapped the paper with one manicured nail. You can sign now or take it home to review, she said. Her tone made it clear there was no real choice. No negotiation, no discussion. I signed because I didn't know what else to do. My hand shook as I wrote my name. Walking out, my legs felt hollow. I made it to the elevator before the tears started. The doors closed, and I pressed myself against the wall, gasping for air. I sat at my desk staring at nothing. My computer screen glowed in front of me, but I couldn't focus on anything displayed there. My hands shook as I opened my email looking for anything official, any company-wide announcement about cuts, any memo explaining the decision. There was nothing, just routine messages about upcoming meetings and project deadlines. I turned to Priya, who sat 2 desks over organizing her files. Did you get an email from HR today? I asked quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up confused. No, why, did something happen? I swallowed hard. Just curious, never mind. I asked Marcus in accounting later, carefully casual as I passed his desk. He laughed like I'd told a joke. Budget cuts, no way, we just approved new bonuses for management last week, company's doing great. My stomach dropped like I'd fallen from a height. I checked with 2 more people before lunch, asking each one carefully, not wanting to seem paranoid. No one else had been touched, no one else had even heard rumors of cuts. Just me, only me. I sat in the break room alone during lunch, staring at my sandwich without eating it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making everything feel harsh and exposed. Someone walked in, saw me sitting there, and turned around without saying a word. I felt it then, the isolation creeping in like cold water rising around me. I wasn't just losing money. I was losing my place here. That afternoon, my supervisor walked past my desk 3 times without acknowledging me. Each time I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled. I always smiled. I sent a follow-up email to Helen requesting written documentation of the policy behind my pay cut. I kept the tone professional, polite, non-confrontational. 2 days passed with no response. On the 3rd day, I was suddenly removed from the client presentation I'd been leading for 6 weeks. My name disappeared from the project folder without explanation. When I asked my supervisor why, he shifted uncomfortably and wouldn't meet my eyes. It's just a team restructuring decision, he said vaguely. Nothing personal. He walked away before I could ask anything else. I nodded and walked back to my desk, feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath me. That afternoon, I noticed people whispering near the water cooler. When I approached to refill my mug, they stopped talking mid-sentence and scattered like I'd caught them planning something they didn't want me to hear. I stood there holding my empty mug, feeling like a ghost haunting my own workplace. HR was icing me out systematically. They wanted me to accept the cut quietly, to stop asking questions, to fade into the background until I quit on my own. It was a strategy, and it was working perfectly. My chest felt tight all day. I couldn't focus on anything. I kept refreshing my email, hopping for an explanation that never came. By the time I left that evening, I realized no one had spoken to me directly in hours. I walked to my car in silence, surrounded by coworkers who pretended I didn't exist. The parking lot felt vast and empty even though it was full of cars. I sat behind the wheel for 20 minutes before I could bring myself to drive home. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind turning over everything that had happened. The pay cut, the silence, the sudden isolation, it all felt coordinated somehow. Then I remembered something that made my stomach clench. 6 months ago, I'd been asked to pull together some reports on staff welfare spending. I'd found discrepancies, entries labeled miscellaneous administrative costs, that didn't match any invoices or receipts I could find. The amounts had been significant but vague. I'd mentioned it once to my supervisor casually, thinking it was just sloppy bookkeeping that needed to be cleaned up. He told me not to worry about it. Helen handles that, he'd said dismissively. I'd let it go because I trusted the system. Now lying there in the dark, I felt sick. What if I'd been flagged then? What if they'd been watching me ever since, waiting for an excuse to push me out before I asked more questions? The pay cut wasn't about budgets. It was about silencing someone who'd seen too much, even if I hadn't understood what I was looking at. I thought about those files, the numbers that didn't add up, the way Helen had looked at me when I asked questions that day. Her expression had been cold, almost angry. I'd been afraid to push back then. I was still afraid now. But the fear felt different this time. It felt like a warning I should have listened to sooner. I turned over and stared at the wall until morning light crept through the blinds. At work the next day, the isolation became unbearable. I walked into a meeting 15 minutes early, hopping to get a decent seat. The only empty chair left was shoved into the corner, half blocked by a filing cabinet. No one moved to make space. I sat down and opened my laptop, pretending not to notice the way people avoided looking at me. During the discussion, I offered an idea I'd been working on for weeks. A solution to a problem we'd been struggling with, complete silence. Then someone else repeated the same idea 5 minutes later, almost word for word, and everyone nodded enthusiastically. They praised the suggestion like it was brilliant and original. I looked around the table. No one met my eyes. After the meeting, I overheard 2 co-workers talking in the hallway just outside the conference room. I feel bad for her, one said quietly. But I'm not getting involved. You know what HR did to the last person who complained. The other one sighed deeply. Yeah, better to just stay out of it. I have a mortgage to pay. I stood frozen behind the door, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. They weren't being cruel, they were being smart. HR had a reputation for destroying anyone who challenged them. People who spoke up disappeared. Contracts weren't renewed. Projects were reassigned. Careers ended quietly. I was already marked and everyone knew it. Sitting back at my desk afterward, I felt the weight of being completely alone. No allies, no support, no one willing to risk their own position to stand beside me. Just me, sinking slowly while everyone watched from a safe distance. I checked my bank account that night and felt the panic rise like a wave threatening to drown me. Rent was due in 2 weeks. My car payment, groceries, utilities, insurance, it all added up to more than I'd have left after the pay cut. I opened a spreadsheet and tried to make the numbers work, adjusting categories, cutting expenses wherever I could. They didn't work. Even with every possible reduction, I'd have to drain my savings just to stay afloat for a few months. After that, I didn't know what I'd do. Move back in with my parents, sleep on a friend's couch, the possibilities all felt humiliating. I sat in my car during lunch the next day and cried. I didn't care if anyone saw me through the windows. The windshield fogged up and I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, gasping for air between sobs that felt like they were being ripped from my chest. I'd worked so hard to build stability. I followed every rule, met every deadline, exceeded every expectation. I'd stayed quiet when I should have spoken up, played the game the way I thought I was supposed to. And this was what I got: humiliation, isolation, and financial ruin designed to push me out. HR didn't care that I couldn't afford to live. They didn't care that I was drowning. To them, I was just a number they could adjust without consequences, a problem they could erase with a single piece of paper. I wiped my face with my sleeve and stared at the dashboard. The clock read 12:47. I still had 13 minutes left before I had to go back inside. I felt small, disposable, forgotten, like I'd never mattered at all. Helen finally responded to my email 3 days later. Her message was short and cold, stripped of any pretense of professionalism or courtesy. The adjustment was part of a department-wide cost reduction strategy. All relevant staff were notified. If you have further questions, please schedule a meeting. I read it 3 times, my hands trembling with anger. It was a lie. A blatant, documented, insulting lie. No one else had been cut. I had proof: conversations with co-workers, unchanged pay stubs I'd glimpsed on desks, the laughter when I'd asked Marcus about budget constraints. But she was betting I wouldn't fight back. She was betting I'd be too scared to push harder. I replied carefully, keeping my tone professional despite the rage burning in my chest. I asked for the specific policy document outlining the reduction and requested a formal meeting to discuss the decision. 2 hours later, she called me into her office. She didn't sit down. She stood behind her desk with her arms crossed, her expression hard. I don't appreciate your tone, she said sharply before I could even speak. We've explained the situation. Continuing to push back shows a lack of professionalism and teamwork. It reflects poorly on your attitude. I stared at her, stunned into silence. I'd asked a simple, reasonable question. Now I was being accused of insubordination, of having an attitude problem, of being difficult. I'm just trying to understand the policy, I said quietly, forcing myself to stay calm. She crossed her arms tighter. If you're unhappy with the decision, you're welcome to explore other opportunities elsewhere. The threat was clear and deliberate. Shut up or leave. Accept this quietly or lose your job entirely. I nodded slowly and walked out, my chest tight. The gaslighting was textbook, straight out of a manual. They wanted me to doubt myself, to believe I was the problem. And it was working. The next morning, my supervisor pulled me aside near the coffee station. His voice was low, almost apologetic, and he kept glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Look, I know this isn't fair, he said quietly, his expression uncomfortable. But you need to let it go. HR doesn't forget. If you keep pushing, they'll find a way to get rid of you completely. They always do. He glanced over his shoulder nervously, then back at me. I've seen it before. People who challenge them just disappear. Quietly, their contracts end. Their projects get reassigned. Then they're gone. Just be smart about this. He walked away quickly before I could respond, leaving me standing there with my empty coffee mug. I stood frozen, processing what he'd just said. He wasn't being cruel or dismissive. He was genuinely scared. Others must have tried standing up to HR before and paid the price. I thought about the coworker someone had mentioned, the one who'd complained about something and disappeared shortly after without explanation. I thought about the empty chair in meetings, the whispers that stopped when I approached, the careful distance everyone maintained around me now. HR operated like a machine designed to crush dissent. Anyone who resisted got destroyed systematically, and everyone else learned to look away. I was already in their sights, already marked as a problem. That night I sat on my couch staring at the wall, feeling the weight of complete defeat pressing down on me. I felt small, powerless, trapped in a system designed to break people like me. The machine was too big, too organized, too protected. I didn't know how to fight back without losing everything I had left, so I decided, at least for now, to stay quiet, to survive, to wait. 2 days later, I overheard Helen and Marcus talking near the copy room. They didn't see me standing around the corner, partially hidden by a tall filing cabinet. She's still asking questions, Marcus said, his voice annoyed and exasperated. Thinks she's going to find some loophole or policy violation. It's getting tiresome. Helen laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that made my stomach turn. Let her try. We'll just put her on a performance review track. Document a few attitude issues, maybe some missed deadlines, make it official. She'll be gone by the end of the quarter and no one will question it. Marcus chuckled in agreement. Perfect, clean and simple. They walked away, still talking, completely unaware I'd heard everything. My hands shook as I stood there, pressing myself against the wall. They weren't even hiding it anymore. They'd already decided I was disposable, already planned exactly how they'd get rid of me. The performance review would be fake. The documentation would be lies. But it wouldn't matter because no one would challenge HR's official records. I'd be quietly erased and everyone would assume I deserved it. I walked to the bus stop that evening feeling completely numb. The city moved around me, cars honking, people laughing and talking on phones, the world continuing like nothing was wrong. But inside I felt like I was disappearing piece by piece. HR had the power, the authority, and the entire system on their side. I was just one person, already being treated like I didn't matter, like I'd never mattered. I sat on the bench and stared at my phone, scrolling through job listings I didn't have the energy to apply for. I felt beaten, broken, like I'd already lost the fight before it even started. The bus came and I got on without looking back at the building behind me. That night I opened my laptop intending to update my resume and start applying elsewhere. As I scrolled through old files looking for the document, something else caught my eye, a spreadsheet I'd saved months ago and completely forgotten about. It was labeled Staff Welfare Budget Analysis Q2. I clicked it open, curious. The numbers stared back at me, row after row of data I'd compiled when asked to reconcile some welfare fund expenses. Line after line of miscellaneous administrative costs, each one vague, unexplained, and suspiciously large. Thousands of dollars marked simply as admin processing or consulting services with no vendor names attached. I remembered now. I'd pulled this together carefully, flagged the irregularities in a detailed email to my supervisor, and been told firmly not to worry about it. Helen handles all that, he'd said dismissively. It's above your pay grade, just focus on your regular work. I felt embarrassed for overstepping and had archived the file, never looking at it again. Now, looking at it with fresh eyes and new context, the pattern was blindingly obvious. Money was being systematically moved out of staff benefit accounts into something unmarked and untraceable. The amounts were too consistent, too regular to be accidental errors or sloppy bookkeeping. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding hard in my chest. This wasn't just administrative sloppiness. This was deliberate theft, organized and ongoing, and I'd been sitting on the evidence for months, too afraid to push harder when I should have. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark living room, feeling the weight of my own silence crushing me like physical pressure. If I'd spoken up then, demanded answers, refused to let it go, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe I wouldn't be drowning now. Maybe others wouldn't have been cheated. I couldn't stop thinking about that spreadsheet. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the numbers scrolling past. I thought about all the times I'd heard people mention that the staff hardship fund was unavailable when they desperately needed it. I thought about the training programs that got cancelled without explanation, the team-building events that disappeared from the budget, the promised bonuses that never materialized. I thought about my own pay cut, and how many others might have been quietly cheated over the years without even realizing it. The guilt sat heavy and uncomfortable in my chest, making it hard to breathe. I told myself repeatedly that I'd been protecting my job, my financial stability, my future, but the truth was uglier than that. I'd been protecting myself while others suffered the consequences of a system I'd seen was broken. Now I was suffering too, and it felt like punishment I genuinely deserved. I sat on my couch with my head in my hands, replaying every moment I could have spoken up louder and didn't. Every time I could have pushed harder. Every time I chose silence over truth, because it was easier and safer. I felt ashamed, weak, complicit in something terrible. I wanted desperately to believe I was a good person who'd simply made understandable mistakes. But good people didn't stay silent when they witnessed injustice happening right in front of them. They acted, they spoke up, they fought back even when it was hard, and I hadn't, not yet, not when it mattered most. I sat there in the darkness of my apartment, feeling the weight of all those failures pressing down on me, wondering if it was already too late to make things right. Another email arrived the next morning before I'd even finished my coffee. The subject line read, "Performance Review Notice Action Required." My hands shook as I opened it, already knowing what I'd find inside. Helen had formally placed me on a performance improvement plan, citing failure to meet expectations and ongoing concerns about attitude and teamwork. There were no specific examples provided, no documentation of actual problems. Just vague accusations carefully worded to sound official and justified. The plan outlined weekly check-ins, additional oversight, and a 90-day evaluation period. It was a trap disguised as support. I read it twice, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall. This was it. They were building their case systematically, creating an official paper trail that would justify firing me. The performance review would be rigged from the start. Every task would be scrutinized unfairly. Every minor mistake would be documented and exaggerated. They manufacture evidence of failure, and no one would question it because it would all look legitimate on paper. I'd be quietly erased from the company, and everyone would assume I simply wasn't good enough. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen while my coworkers moved around me like I wasn't there. I felt invisible, powerless, completely disposable. Then something inside me snapped, not loudly or dramatically, just a quiet final break like a rope that had been fraying for months suddenly giving way. I closed the email carefully and took a slow, deep breath. I thought about the spreadsheet sitting on my laptop at home. I thought about Helen's smug, confident face. I thought about every person who'd been cheated, lied to, and crushed by HR while they laughed behind closed doors. I couldn't keep living in fear. I couldn't keep letting them win while I slowly disappeared. I sat perfectly still, my jaw tight, and made a decision. I wasn't going to fight back impulsively or emotionally, but I was going to watch. I was going to pay attention. I was going to remember absolutely everything, and when the right moment came, I was going to act. The next morning, I arrived at work early. I didn't announce it or make a show of it. I simply came in quietly before anyone else and stayed late after everyone had left for the evening. I stopped asking questions that might seem challenging. I stopped looking upset or defeated. I smiled politely at Helen when I passed her in the hallway. I thanked Marcus when he handed me paperwork. I became invisible in a different way, not out of fear or defeat, but out of careful, deliberate strategy. No one suspected a thing because I gave them nothing to suspect. I started paying close attention to patterns. I watched carefully when HR scheduled their private meetings. I noticed when they closed their office doors and spoke in hushed, urgent voices. I observed which days they processed expense reports and which days they didn't. I noted who came and went from their offices, which vendors they mentioned, which accounts they accessed most frequently. I didn't write anything down where it could be found. I didn't take photos or forward emails. I just watched, quietly, carefully, patiently. My anger was still there, burning steady and hot under the surface. But I didn't let it show on my face or in my voice. I kept it controlled, focused, useful. I wasn't planning anything concrete yet. I was just collecting pieces, building a detailed map of exactly how they operated, learning their routines and vulnerabilities. They thought I'd given up completely. They thought I'd accepted my fate. They thought fear had broken me into submission. That was exactly what I wanted them to think. Let them feel safe. Let them get comfortable. Let them make mistakes while I watched and remembered everything. Patterns started to emerge clearly over the following weeks. HR always scheduled what they called administrative reviews within 24 hours after large transactions hit the accounting system. Staff reimbursement requests were mysteriously delayed by exactly 2 weeks whenever certain expense categories showed unusual spikes. I started noticing the precise timing, how invoices for vague, consulting fees appeared right before welfare fund balances dropped significantly. It wasn't random chaos. It was coordinated, systematic, almost elegant in its organization. They had a well-oiled system, and they'd obviously been running it successfully for years without anyone noticing or caring. I memorized transaction dates down to the specific day. I memorized the names that appeared repeatedly on invoices. I memorized which internal accounts were used most frequently for transfers and which ones sat untouched. I didn't need to take physical notes that could be discovered. I just needed to remember, to build the complete picture piece by piece in my mind. Every morning during my commute, I reviewed mentally what I'd observed the day before. Every night before sleep, I cross-referenced it with what I already knew, looking for connections and confirmations. The picture was becoming increasingly clear and damning. They weren't just stealing a little money here and there opportunistically. They were stealing systematically, operating what amounted to an organized embezzlement scheme right under everyone's noses. And no one in authority was checking because everyone trusted HR implicitly to manage these funds properly. I felt the anger grow stronger and more focused, but I stayed outwardly calm. I smiled pleasantly. I waited patiently. I was learning that revenge wasn't about acting fast or striking impulsively. It was about acting right, at exactly the right moment, with overwhelming force. One afternoon I walked past Helen's office and heard laughter spilling through the partially open door. She was on the phone with someone, her voice smug and relaxed. "They never actually read their pay slips anyway," she said, laughing genuinely. "As long as we keep the individual amounts relatively small per person, no one ever notices the pattern. They just assume it's taxes or something." Maury laughter. My stomach turned violently, but I kept walking at a normal pace, my face carefully neutral, showing nothing. Later that same day, I watched Marcus approve an invoice for something labeled HR Consulting Services Optimization that I knew for a fact didn't exist. I'd never seen any consultants. There were no meetings, no reports, no deliverables. He clicked through the approval in less than 5 seconds, barely glancing at the screen. Then he leaned back in his chair and joked casually with another HR staff member about creative accounting solutions and how no one actually audits this stuff anyway. They both laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all week. I sat back down at my desk, my hands folded carefully in my lap, and felt the anger solidify into something colder and harder than rage. They weren't just stealing from people who trusted them. They were openly bragging about it, laughing about how easy it was, how stupid everyone else was for not noticing. They felt completely untouchable, protected by their positions and by everyone's assumption that HR would never do anything wrong. They genuinely believed no one would ever challenge them, because no one ever had before. I thought about all the people who'd been quietly cheated over the years, people exactly like me who trusted the system and got crushed by it without ever knowing why. I wanted to scream. Instead, I took a calm sip of water and went back to work like nothing had happened. I wasn't ready to act yet, but I was getting very, very close. The rage was transforming into something more useful, absolute determination. A coworker named Sam stopped by my desk one morning looking exhausted and frustrated. He was normally upbeat, but today his shoulders sagged with defeat. "Hey, do you know anything about why the hardship fund request I submitted 2 weeks ago got denied?" he asked quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "They said the account is low, and there's nothing available right now. But I thought it was supposed to be fully funded at the start of every year. My wife just had surgery, and we're drowning in medical bills." I looked at him, my chest tightening painfully with anger I couldn't show. I don't know, I said carefully, keeping my voice sympathetic but neutral. Maybe try asking HR directly for an explanation. He sighed deeply, running his hand through his hair. I did ask. Helen just said there's nothing available right now and to try again next quarter. Next quarter. Like we can just wait 3 months while the bills pile up. He walked away looking defeated and lost, his shoulders hunched under the weight of financial stress. I sat there staring at my screen, my hands clenched into fists under my desk where no one could see. The hardship fund should have been fully stocked with at least $50,000. It was funded annually with a significant budget, specifically designated for exactly these emergencies: medical crises, family deaths, unexpected disasters. If it was somehow low or unavailable, it was because someone had systematically drained it and redirected that money elsewhere. I thought about Sam's exhausted face, the desperation in his voice. I thought about all the others who'd been told the same lie over the years. The injustice angered me. This wasn't just about me anymore, about my stolen salary or damaged career. This was about everyone they'd quietly stolen from, everyone they'd lied to with fake sympathy, everyone they'd made feel small and powerless and alone. I felt the decision settle permanently in my chest like a stone dropping into deep water. I was going to bring them down completely, not for revenge, for justice. I spent the entire weekend at home, working methodically and carefully. I quietly pulled together everything I had legitimate access to through my normal job responsibilities. I didn't hack into anything. I didn't break into secured systems. I didn't access files I wasn't authorized to see. I just used the budget reports, transaction logs, approval records, and financial summaries I was allowed to view as part of my regular work. I cross-referenced them systematically with the spreadsheet I'd saved months ago, the one I'd almost forgotten about. Every single discrepancy lined up perfectly. Every vague miscellaneous charge matched exactly with a suspicious transfer on the same date. Every unexplained consulting fee corresponded with a drop in staff benefit accounts. The patterns were absolutely undeniable once you knew what to look for. I built a timeline spanning 2 full years, documenting each transaction with dates, amounts, account numbers, and approval signatures. I calculated the total 3 times to make absolutely sure. Over 2 years, they'd systematically redirected more than $2.3 million from staff benefits, training programs, and welfare funds. The money had been funneled carefully into fake invoices, non-existent consulting contracts, and deliberately inflated administrative costs. It was massive in scale, highly organized, and completely hidden from anyone who didn't know exactly where to look or what questions to ask. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen filled with damning evidence. I didn't feel powerful or triumphant. I felt physically sick, my stomach churning with disgust and anger, but I also felt something else growing stronger: absolute certainty. This was real. This was documented. This was provable, and no one else was going to expose it because no one else knew it existed. It had to be me. There was no one else. I spent the next week organizing everything into a clean, professionally documented packet that anyone could understand. I included executive summaries, detailed transaction breakdowns, timeline comparisons, and clear explanations of each discrepancy written in plain language. I made sure everything was easy to follow, even for someone who didn't work in finance or accounting. I didn't add emotional commentary. I didn't make personal accusations. I didn't include speculation or assumptions. I just presented the objective facts as clearly as possible and let them speak for themselves. The evidence was absolutely airtight. Then I made multiple encrypted copies and stored them in several different secure locations. I prepared 3 separate anonymous email accounts using public internet access, being extremely careful to leave no digital trail that could lead back to me. I wasn't going to confront HR directly and give them any chance to spin the story, bury the evidence, or somehow blame everything on me. I was going to send it simultaneously to 3 places where they absolutely couldn't ignore it: the Board of Directors Audit Committee, the external auditing firm the company used, and the company's legal compliance department. All at once, all completely anonymously. No return address, no identifying information, just pure documented facts. I sat at my kitchen table late on Sunday night, staring at the send button on my screen. My hand hovered over the mouse, trembling slightly. Once I did this, there was absolutely no going back. The consequences would be massive and irreversible. People would lose their jobs, investigations would consume months, the entire company would be thrown into chaos, but people had been cheated, money had been stolen, the system was broken and corrupt. I took a slow, deep breath, closed my eyes, and clicked send 3 times in rapid succession. The emails disappeared into the void. It was done. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, my heart pounding, wondering what I'd just set in motion. There was no way to know if it would work. I just had to wait and hope that someone would take it seriously. Next morning, I walked into work like absolutely nothing had happened. My heart pounded so hard in my chest I was certain people could see it through my shirt, but my face stayed perfectly calm and neutral. I smiled pleasantly at the receptionist like always. I nodded at co-workers in the hallway. I bought my usual coffee from the break room. I sat down at my desk and opened my email, pretending to focus on routine tasks while my mind screamed. Inside, every nerve was on fire. I kept checking my phone obsessively under my desk, wondering if the evidence had been received, if anyone was actually reading it, if they'd take it seriously or just dismiss it as some anonymous crank. Hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Nothing happened, everything seemed completely normal. People laughed at their desks. Meetings happened on schedule. The day proceeded exactly like every other day. I started to feel the doubt creep in like poison. What if they simply ignored it? What if they buried it to protect the company's reputation? What if I'd risked absolutely everything for nothing? Helen walked past my desk around noon, her expression as smug and confident as always. She didn't look worried. She didn't look guilty or nervous. She looked like someone who believed she'd already won, who felt completely secure in her position and power. I watched her disappear into her office, laughing at something Marcus said, and I felt my stomach twist with fear. Maybe I'd miscalculated. Maybe the system was too strong, too invested in protecting itself. Maybe they'd find a way to make this all disappear. I closed my eyes and forced myself to breathe slowly and deeply. I'd done everything I could possibly do. I'd gathered the evidence carefully and presented it clearly. Now I just had to wait and trust that someone, somewhere would care enough about the truth to act on it. The waiting was torture, but there was nothing else I could do except sit there and pretend everything was normal. 2 days later, everything changed completely. An email went out to the entire company early in the morning: mandatory all-staff meeting at 2 p.m. today. Attendance is required, no exceptions. No explanation, no context, just the directive. People immediately started whispering nervously at their desks, speculating about layoffs or restructuring. I felt my stomach twist violently. I walked into the large conference room with everyone else, my hands shaking so badly I had to clasp them together. Helen and Marcus sat near the back of the room, and I noticed immediately that their faces were pale, almost grey. They kept glancing at each other, whispering urgently, their body language screaming tension and fear. Something was clearly very wrong from their perspective. The audit director, a stern woman named Patricia who normally worked from the corporate office downtown, stood at the front of the room. She was perfectly calm, professional, and direct in a way that made the room fall silent instantly. "We've recently received credible evidence of significant financial misconduct within the HR department," she said clearly. Her voice carried to every corner of the room. "A comprehensive investigation is currently underway. Several individuals have been placed on immediate administrative leave pending the outcome of this review. We take these allegations extremely seriously." Room erupted in shocked whispers and gasps. I sat perfectly still, barely breathing, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Helen's face had drained completely of colour. Marcus stared at the floor, his jaw clenched tight. I watched other HR staff members exchange panicked glances. The trap had sprung perfectly. Everything I'd sent, every document, every number, every carefully documented transaction, had landed exactly where it needed to. And there was absolutely no way out for them now. The evidence was too clear, too thorough, too damning. I felt something like relief wash over me, mixed with a strange sense of unreality. It had actually worked. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Helen, Marcus, and 2 other senior HR staff members were escorted out of the building that same afternoon by security personnel. Their offices were sealed with yellow tape like crime scenes. Security guards stood outside the doors, preventing anyone from entering. People gathered in small clusters throughout the office, whispering intensely, speculating about what had happened, trying to piece together the story from fragments of information. I sat quietly at my desk, appearing to work, watching it all unfold around me like a carefully choreographed performance. No one suspected me of anything. No one even glanced my way with curiosity or suspicion. I'd been so invisible for so long, so thoroughly dismissed and sidelined, that no one thought I was capable of something this significant. I was just the quiet woman who'd been pushed into the shadows, the one everyone had learned to ignore. That invisibility had become my greatest asset. Over the next few days, more details emerged through official company communications and hallway gossip. The audit committee had found exactly what I'd documented in meticulous detail: millions of dollars systematically stolen from staff funds over multiple years, funneled into fake contracts, non-existent vendors, and grotesquely inflated expenses. They'd been running this scheme for years, possibly longer, with absolute confidence that no one would ever notice or care. Co-workers started talking openly about times they'd been unfairly denied access to hardship funds or watched training budgets mysteriously disappear without explanation. People shared stories of promised bonuses that never materialized, benefit programs that got quietly cancelled. Everyone had noticed small things over the years, but had never connected them into a larger pattern. Now the pattern was undeniable, and people were genuinely angry, hurt, and betrayed. I listened to their stories during lunch breaks and said nothing. I didn't need credit or recognition. I just needed them to finally know the truth about what had been done to them. A week after the initial explosion, I received an unexpected email from the board's interim HR liaison, someone brought in from outside to clean up the massive mess. The subject line read, "Salary correction and formal apology." I opened it with trembling hands, not knowing what to expect. "We sincerely apologize for the error in your compensation that occurred during the previous administration. Your full salary has been restored to its original level, and complete back pay for all affected periods will be issued with your next paycheck. We deeply regret any hardship this situation may have caused. Thank you for your patience and professionalism during this extremely difficult time." No detailed explanation of why I'd been specifically targeted. No acknowledgement of the months of suffering, humiliation, and financial terror I'd endured. Just a cold, clinical corporate apology that carefully avoided admitting any real wrongdoing. I stared at the email for a long time, my emotions churning in confusion. Part of me wanted to be furious that they didn't say more, didn't acknowledge the full scope of what had been done to me. But another part of me felt something completely different, pure, overwhelming relief. I'd won, not loudly, not publicly, not with recognition or praise, but I'd won in the way that actually mattered. I closed the email and leaned back in my chair, letting out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for months. My co-workers moved around me, completely unaware that I was the reason everything had changed, that I was the anonymous source who'd brought down an entire corrupt system. I didn't need them to know. I didn't need recognition or gratitude or public acknowledgement. I just needed to know, deep in my own heart, that I'd done the right thing. That I'd taken something terrible and broken and found a way to fix it. That I'd transformed my fear and powerlessness into something that actually mattered and helped people. That was enough.